If we know these 50 days are a model, a template for not just rest. Rest in itself, yeah, good. But Sabbath rest, God rest, holy rest. If they are a template, boy, it would be worth taking them and looking at them and seeing how they apply to even our day, how they apply to us. So in this whole idea of Sabbath rest, there are insights we can pull from the first 40 days. What kind of things? Well, start with this. The Sabbath rest is a vacation from our normal work, but it is not a vacation from God. Sometimes I think we forget that. We think, even if as church people, I'm on vacation, I'm just taking a rest from everything, including God himself. But look at the model set here. In the first part of this rest, God did not leave these people. As a matter of fact, he was closer. Now they were starting to understand. So the risen Christ, he comes, he explains, he reminds, he directs towards the future. He comes back risen and said, I told you I had to die, remember? And this is why. And this is the consequence, and this is where it's leading. So the past is connected to the future in all of this, as God is telling them all of these things. So the whole idea with this is our Sabbath rest doesn't take us away from God. It takes us to God. It takes us closer to God in the everyday stuff. We might put aside, you might be someone who is involved in a whole lot of Christian work. The idea of your Sabbath rest is to set aside what you usually do and be still before God, to await with expectation the personal side going on. But it isn't a vacation from God, it's a vacation to God. In Sabbath rest, that's where we get the peace that God is still in control. And that's where the peace really comes from, is God is still in control. If we remember, that's where it all fits in. When Jesus showed up, one of the first things he said to his disciples was, peace be with you. Peace be with you. They couldn't believe that Christ had risen from the dead. We went through that last Sunday. We looked at how nobody wanted to believe until they actually saw it for themselves. He brought peace in that he was there and that he was still in control. This is an important thing in this peace thing and God in control, is that especially if it's a walk in faith, things build up. The more you walk out on that limb of faith, the more anxieties start to build up. The more fears can start to build up. It's kind of the byproduct of forging ahead with God, like grains of sand. It's like the floor in your house, it just doesn't become dirty. It's just little by little things start collecting. And if you don't ever sweep it out, well, the next thing you would be walking through a layer of dust or dirt all the time. There has to be intervals where you clean it out. And basically, our souls and our minds and our hearts are like that. These fears are like, and anxieties and concerns are like grains of sand. Maybe there's big ones, you get a boulder or two, but most of it is grains of sand, isn't it? And they just build up and build up. Somehow you have to get rid of them. Some point there has to be a sweeping away. That's what happens in the God rest. In the Sabbath rest, God comes in a way that we can't do ourselves. And when we realize that he's still there, that he's still in control, it helps to sweep away the anxieties. God took care of things. He will take care of things. So in the Sabbath rest, we find peace because God is still in control and we're realizing, we're experiencing it. In the Sabbath rest, in that quiet is where we hear the promises. Think about these guys. If you look through the Gospels, as you read through, you start at some point and go, man, these guys are really thick. As over and over, and the closer they got to Jerusalem, And Jesus was telling them, the Son of Man must die. The Son of Man will be humiliated. The Son of Man must do so he can rise. And they were just like, what does that mean? Stop talking like that. You're bumming me out. Stop that. And so they just never understood. And he went on and on and on. And it wasn't until this time of waiting after his death, in his resurrection, when they were talking to him then, did it start to make sense that there was a promise going on. And the promise was when he left, he would send the Holy Spirit. That's a big, big deal. It's not enough to believe. Because, as a matter of fact, you know what faith is that's just kind of intellectual? It's a sure recipe for frustration. Because you are presented with a standard of living that you cannot live up to. None of us can. The only hope is through this. To live godly is to have God inside, which is the whole concept of Holy Spirit, presence of God within. However we come to terms with what that looks like, that must happen. And the way it happened was they were to wait. It happened during the rest period. It was the end of the rest period, but it was during the rest period they waited. And keep this in mind too, waiting is not necessarily a passive act. Waiting is an active thing. Example, maybe you're a bird watcher or a hiker or something else where you're waiting, you're wanting to see something. So there you are out walking in the woods and you hear a twig snap somewhere. And you stop dead in your tracks and you start looking intently. Where did that sound come from? Or is there an animal over there? And in this, you're actually not more passive, you're less. You're more intense. Your eyes are looking really sharply. Your ears are attuned. You're very much open to your surroundings. Where did that sound come from? What is it? In the first service, we talked about this, and Steve always has to pull it into a practical side, right? And he said, well, I remember like that, except I was worried about the neighbor's dog. They had a big, mean dog, and he said, hear the twig snap, and I stopped because the next thing that snapped might be my leg, So in his case, he was listening for something bad. But in the sake of rest, in the Sabbath rest, we're waiting on something good. We're opening ourselves up. Opening yourself up is an active thing. You just don't naturally do it. We have to make an effort. But if we do, that's where we start to hear the promise. God talks to us in the silence so we can face the storms. It's the way it works. In the Sabbath rest, as we look at this, we're not only in this holy rest opening ourselves up to God, God actually uses the time to open ourselves up to ourselves. We get a chance in the peace of the Sabbath rest to face God, but also to face ourselves. Prime example for us in this, John 21. The boys are out fishing. The risen Christ is on the shore making a campfire. And they bring in their net. There's amazing the places you can go with this illustration. But in this context of rest, they bring in their fish. Jesus starts a barbecue for them. There they are all chowing down on their tilapia. And there they are eating away. And then Jesus, I just picture them sitting on an old piece of driftwood or something, you have a campfire, you got to sit on a log, right? So there they are, and they're sitting, and Jesus kind of sidles up to Peter there, and then he begins this conversation. Hey, Peter, yeah? Do you love me? Well, yeah, I love you, Lord. Hey, Peter, yeah. Do you love me? Yeah. Peter's wondering what's going on here. A little later, a third time. Peter, do you love me? And then it says Peter was grieved. And he answers him, you know all things, you know I love you. That's an important thing in this idea of rest. Why did Jesus keep asking until Peter was grieved? Asked until Peter was grieved. The reason is Peter had to face his grief. There was a grief that had to be faced. Well, what grief? 3 times. 50 days isn't a long time. And well, this is even within the 40 days. Not too long ago, there was this guy named Peter, and they were in that upper room. And Jesus, once again, is trying to tell him about how he's going to die and all this. And Peter is so confident in his faith that he said he just pictures himself as the hero of the faith. He's going to die the hero's death. Jesus, if everybody else deserts you, I'm your man. I'll be standing there, man. If you got to die, we're dying together. Wow, just such confidence in himself. The night doesn't even end. And 3 times he looks physically Jesus in the eye and denies he even knows him. You know, man, think about this. For us, it's bad enough. If you're a Christian, I know there are times you've gone home and said, man, I wasn't a very good Christian in that particular circumstance, or man, I kind of let the Lord down there. Imagine Peter, with all his confidence, looking God in the eye and denying he even knows him. Wow. Can you imagine what scars that would leave on you? To suffer that kind of failure, to realize that you were really that weak? And so here it is. These many days later, and Jesus is asking this. 3 times Peter, in denying, told Christ he had no love for him at all. How? If somebody is scarred that bad, how do you approach them without setting them off into defense mode? How do you approach that for healing without reopening the wound? The answer for Jesus was, give him a chance to redeem himself. Peter, do you love me? Redemption, a chance to reverse what was done before. Yes, I love you. Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. 3 times. And each time what is beautiful is it comes then with, now that we're clearing that up, here's what you got to do. Isn't it amazing? Jesus takes this situation, doesn't tear him apart, doesn't reopen the wound, simply starts the healing process, gets over the past, and directs him to what he's about to do in the future. It sets the whole thing back on course. God has his way, doesn't he? Even in our time with the Holy Spirit, if we're in a stillness, in a rest, how the Holy Spirit, how God can talk to you without setting you off on defense mode. There's something, man, you really need to clean up. But if another person brought it to you, man, you would be in defense mode like that. But yet, God can bring it up and simply turn it into healing. And that's what's going on, but it takes place in the Sabbath rest. It takes place in the peace. It takes place in the quietness. God opens up this place of safety where we can even face ourselves. Sabbath rest regenerates. It's not simply just resting, it's regenerating, it's healing, it's all kinds of things going on. There's a lot of hopes that come through Christianity. And what if we lose them just because we're burnt out? But we don't have to be. There is a safeguard that must be in place. We must be in a place, in a practice of Sabbath rest.